Hello, all. Welcome. We've been watching you join. I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name is Brooke Size, and I'm a functional nutrition practitioner and also soon to be licensed psychotherapist. So I take an integrative approach in working on a lot of things. Today, we're going to talk about blood sugar and metabolism. I tend to focus in practice when I work with people one-on-one on things like metabolism, diabetes, pre-diabetes, and then also anxiety and mood issues, gut health, things like IBS. And so today we're going to go into some of the information around, let me make sure these slides are moving. We'll go over what blood sugar is, what insulin is, what reactive and insulin resistant blood sugar is. We're going to talk about how to put together a meal, some tips and tricks. I won't spend too much time. Sometimes I do this class as an hour long, and we have 30 minutes today. So I won't talk too much about supplements, but we will touch on lifestyle factors so that you have kind of some quick takeaways to support blood sugar. And then we'll have a little bit of time for question and answer. Right at 12:30, I will be on here until 12:45. So if you don't need to run right away, we will have some time for questions. So as we go through the information, if questions come up, feel free to put them in the chat box. I might not read them right away, but I will circle back to them at the end. Also, before I get started, I do always want to state that this class is not intended to diagnose, treat, or mitigate any disease or illness. As I said, we're not going to talk too much about supplements, but definitely some supplements and even some foods can interact with prescription medications. So if you are on those, make sure to ask your pharmacist if you start something new. You can ask your doctor also. Sometimes pharmacists are readily accessible if you call over at the pharmacy, and they're really great at giving you info about your medications. All right, so we're going to kind of get into some basics. We're going to talk a lot today about macronutrients, and macronutrients are what foods are made up of. They're also made up of micronutrients. Micronutrients are your vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients. We'll spend more time today on macronutrients, which are protein, fat, and carbohydrates. So carbohydrates, when we eat them, whether it is bread, a donut, an apple, a sweet potato, they all break down through digestion to sugar. And then those sugars will enter the bloodstream and become blood sugar or blood glucose. And glucose is one of our primary fuel sources. The other fuel source is fat. And fat will provide ideally between 50 to 70% of the body's energy. That doesn't mean we're eating 50 to 70% fat. On some dietary approaches, people are eating that much. But what this means typically is that our body, we store fat, right? So when we're not eating in between meals, our body will use our stored fat for energy. So it prefers to work off of primarily fat, and then it's going to use glucose for energy. One thing to just note, because of course there's the third macronutrient, which is protein, is that our body does not store protein. So if we eat too much protein at one sitting, we will use what we can, and then we will turn the rest into sugar. And if we can't use it as glucose, as blood sugar, then we will turn it into fat and store it as fat. So our two stored macronutrients are fat and carbohydrates. And another note on that is that carbohydrates, we only store about 500 grams in our muscles and our liver, and that is stored as glycogen. So when we eat, let's say we eat full fat yogurt that's flavored like a strawberry yogurt, we're going to get a little bit of protein that we use right then. We're going to get some fat, and we're going to get some sugar from the added sugar in the flavored yogurt. And that sugar will go straight into our bloodstream. The fat will be either converted to sugar or stored as fat. And any excess sugar would get stored as sugar or as fat. So I know that's a little confusing, but I just want to kind of let you know how we use those three macronutrients. So with carbohydrates, we have simple and complex. Simple carbohydrates, the thing you can know about those is they're quickly digested. They get turned into sugar fast. So they're going to raise blood sugar much faster. Some sources of those are anything that's refined grains. So that would be bread, pasta, bagels, instant oatmeal, rolled oats. Whole grain flours are included in that. So if it is a flour, then it's been refined and it's now simple. The only bread that would be more complex is sprouted grain bread, like Ezekiel bread, and there's some other brands of sprouted grain bread out there. Of course, sugar, low-fat dairy is a simple carbohydrate, juice, and then we have complex carbohydrates, and those are digested and absorbed more slowly due to their fiber and fat content. They tend to contain less concentrated amount of sugar. So when we eat complex carbohydrates, let's say there's 20 grams of carbs in a simple carb or 20 grams in a complex, we're going to get the same amount of sugar in the body. But if it's complex, we get it delivered more slowly. So it's not going to raise our blood sugar as quickly, and it will sustain a little bit longer as opposed to a spike and a drop. And I'm going to show you a picture of that in a moment. So sources of complex carbs are vegetables, fruits, full fat dairy, nuts and seeds, and beans or lentils. So here we see reactive blood sugar. And so if this green area is our normal blood sugar, when you go to the doctor and you get your fasting blood sugar, that would be somewhere between 70 and, we'll say 110, but that's after eats. Let me say, instead of fasting, if you've just eaten, so an hour or two later, we're going to see that reactive is between 70 to 110. And so if that blood sugar goes up high because we ate enough carbohydrates that it pops it up, when it's above normal, when it's up there definitely above 120, we get increased insulin, which we'll talk about soon, increased fat storage. We can get mood swings and brain fog. So that happens when our blood sugar gets too high. Then usually if it pops up too high too fast, it will dip down too low. It's what we often refer to as a blood sugar crash. If it gets down there, we will have low blood sugar, which can cause increased cortisol, which is a stress hormone. So it's stressful for the body when that drops too low. We get increased cravings smartly because our body wants to get our blood sugar back up. We get fatigue and we get brain fog. And if we do go eat some simple carbohydrate, like a candy bar or a sweetened coffee or something that's going to get our blood sugar back up, it will go up, but usually again, it will pop up too high. So we kind of get on this cycle of blood sugar going up and down and up and down. Blood sugar, if it's out of range, if our blood sugar is too high, that is damaging to the cells of our body. It can actually stick to proteins and disrupt their function. And the easiest way to imagine this is through skin. Collagen is a protein, and we want it to cross-link in a healthy way so that we have supple skin with elasticity to it. And if that doesn't happen, it can cause wrinkles. So it can literally age us more quickly over the years. We might also see this happening in joints with stiff joints or weak or brittle bones, tight tendons, constricted blood vessels, which would be the case with, high blood pressure. And so this is all worsening. These things can worsen when blood sugar is elevated. Our body does have some naturally built-in systems for managing the damage that happens as we metabolize. Because even when we are eating a food plan that is very good for healthy blood sugar, we will have some oxidation happening, which essentially means that there is a little bit of damage that happens as we breathe and as we eat, and that's what we would refer to as aging. However, we have these internal antioxidant systems that can repair the damage that happens as we metabolize and as we breathe. And those things are, zinc and vitamin E and selenium and vitamin C. We have antioxidants that will help to repair any damage that happens to the cells in our body. However, if we're eating a lot of sugar and refined grains, so we're increasing our blood sugar on a regular basis, and we're not eating enough antioxidants, which we would typically get from a wide range of vegetables and fruits, then we may have this damage happening without enough repair. The repair is too low, and it's happening faster than we can fix it. And so again, sort of a takeaway there is it just is increasing. We're aging more quickly than we would otherwise. So this is what's happening with the standard American diet, because the standard American diet is very high in sugars. You know, we have soda pops and big size sodas, big Starbucks coffees with lots of sugars added, you know, supersized hamburgers. So we have big buns and ketchup with sugar and French fries. And so if that is being consumed on a regular basis, those type of foods, then we're getting that high carbohydrate without enough of the other antioxidants from vegetables and fruits that we would need to mitigate some of that. So I mentioned earlier that as our blood sugar goes up, our insulin goes up. And insulin is a really important hormone. It is produced by the pancreas in response to eating, and it tells our body what to do with calories. I like to describe it as like the director of things happening in the body when we start eating. So as soon as we start eating, our body, a series of things happen to start to decide what to do with the incoming calories. And insulin is the director of it. Insulin says, all right, body, stop burning fat. So if insulin is high, there is a message sent to store fat. Do not break down fat on the body because we have incoming calories, which we can use right now. It will also direct some of the carbohydrates we eat to convert to fat to store for later use. And it's going, as I mentioned, to direct fat cells to store fat. And that's really important because I have seen people doing a wonderful job eating a lot of healthy foods and reducing the amount of refined sugars and flours they're eating, but still putting honey in their tea all day and sipping on it throughout the day. And although honey can be a great option to include in, you know, for a lot of health benefits, if we're sipping on honey all day in our tea, it's sending a message to increase insulin and not giving the body a break to then burn fat. And so it sort of counteracts hormonally what we're trying to do with the healthy foods that we're eating. And so it's good to have breaks between meals where we're not taking in any calories so that insulin levels can drop and the body can burn stored energy. Some of the symptoms, if insulin becomes elevated, is hunger, cravings, and exhaustion. And I'll explain why here in a moment. There are some really negative effects to elevated insulin, and we see this with diabetes that's unmanaged. There's a lot of complications that can occur from unmanaged diabetes. And this is why is due to both blood sugar, but also insulin, which is very inflammatory. So we talked about how it increases fat storage and reduces our ability to use stored fat. So we can end up gaining weight with elevated insulin. We can also, it plays a role in high blood pressure. It increases C-reactive protein. And C-reactive protein is a marker that you can get when you have blood work done to look for inflammation. So increased inflammation. It encourages the proliferation of cells, which we would see in cases of cancer. And so that's, you know, obviously some effect that we would not want to have. Stimulates brain neurons to produce amyloid proteins. And amyloid proteins are found high in the brains of people with Alzheimer's. And this is one of the reasons that Alzheimer's is being referred to as type 3 diabetes, is that there is a high blood sugar, high insulin component most likely involved in cases of the disease. So what we eat has a huge effect on blood sugar and on that hormone insulin and whether it's high or low, how that's working. So I wanted to go through a couple meals because throughout the last, 30 years, our approach to a healthy breakfast has really evolved. It used to be, I remember growing up, like this was a healthy breakfast. It was, cereal, skim milk, orange juice, light strawberry yogurt. As long as it was low fat, then we were good, right? And if you look at the nutrient profile on this, we've got 15 grams of protein. That's pretty good. I would suggest, anywhere from 15 to 25 grams of protein at a meal. We don't really need much more than that because, again, we don't store protein. So aiming for around 20 grams at a meal is a pretty good amount that the body could use. So we've got close to that. A little bit of fiber, not much. It's low fat. So if we were back in 80s, 90s, 1.8 grams of fat, that would be considered healthy. And the calorie count is 482. However, when we eat this meal, there's 99 grams of carbohydrates. There is 73.5 grams of sugar. And this is just in about a cup and a half of frosted oat cereal with just an 8-ounce glass of orange juice and that light strawberry yogurt. There's also carbs in the skim milk. And so once we digest that 73.5 grams of sugar, that turns into 19 teaspoons of sugar in the blood. And 19 teaspoons, we only need 1 teaspoon of sugar in our blood at any time. And so that is 19 times the amount that we need in the body. That is definitely, if we go back to that picture here, we're going to shoot our blood sugar way up above normal. And because there's the things that would help slow down the digestion of that carbohydrate is protein, fat, or fiber. And we see that this is very low in fiber. There is some protein, but it's very low in fat. So because it goes up so fast, it's going to drop rapidly. And likely this person is going to be hungry 2 hours later, 2 to 3 hours later. They're going to be craving sugar. They're going to be reaching for the next thing to eat, maybe even feeling kind of the brain fog or kind of shaky and reach for a candy bar or a sweetened coffee or something. So we end up on that roller coaster with that meal. Here's a different type of breakfast. And to point out that if we're trying to get a breakfast that has a reasonable amount of carbohydrates, of complex carbs and protein and healthy fat, there's a lot of ways we can put that together. So if you're vegetarian or you don't eat eggs, or you don't eat meat, there's different ways that you could put this together, but this is just one option. 2 eggs scrambled in butter, red peppers, mushrooms, cheddar cheese, turkey bacon, and a medium pear. And this used to be considered in the 80s not a healthy breakfast. So if we look at the calories, it's higher, 538. The fat is 29.66, which would have been considered really high. I know when I was growing up. The carbs are at 32.5, fibers 10.5, sugars at 19.9, which is from the pear, and the protein's at 30. And so once this meal is digested, this breaks down to about 4.5 teaspoons of sugar, which is mostly from the pear. And like I said, we just need 1 teaspoon in the blood. So we get a little extra, but when we get extra, our body's going to store it. Because we're getting a lot of fiber, fat, and protein with that meal, it's going to absorb pretty slowly. And so that will likely carry us for a while. And we probably won't get hungry again for as soon as we would after that first meal. And so if you look at the bottom blood sugar level here, that is a meal that's more likely to kind of slowly increase blood sugar, but keep it from spiking too high. If we look up above where it says insulin resistant state, this is what starts to happen over time as prediabetes develops or diabetes, and eventually diabetes, I should say. So if we are getting too many simple carbohydrates, also we'll talk about some other things that can cause insulin resistance, but stress is one. If this is happening, when we eat those carbohydrates and insulin is released on the cell membrane, there's receptors for insulin. And so insulin goes to that cell receptor and says, hey, I've got, carbs here, let it in. And the cell responds and it lets the glucose into the cell. And then that gets turned into ATP and we have energy. So with insulin resistance, what happens is the receptors, they stop responding. They are resistant to the insulin. And so when that happens, the sugar cannot get into the cell. So we have a cell that is not getting energy. We're not making energy for the body. Blood sugar's high and insulin's high. So we likely will feel tired and fatigued and hungry and have cravings. And the blood sugar and insulin levels are high. Some causes of this are eating a diet high in simple carbs, excess cortisol, so that's our stress hormone, so excess stress, inflammation, which can come from a variety of sources, potentially a lack of micronutrients. We need things like vitamin C and magnesium and chromium to metabolize sugar. So if we don't have those nutrients, we also might just have trouble with metabolism. And then there's a slew of other things like lack of sleep or the wrong types of exercise, that too many omega-6 fats, that's going to be canola and vegetable oils, that can also play a role. So what we can do is first take a look at how we're putting our meal together. Are we getting some protein? Are we getting some healthy fat? Are we getting some vegetables to get good micronutrients? And then how many carbs are in our meal? You know, what foods are we eating that contain carbohydrates? And does that seem like a reasonable amount? And sticking more to complex, sticking more to things like beans and, you know, lentils and sweet potatoes and whole grains like quinoa or brown rice. I get asked this question a lot about non-caloric sweeteners, so I always throw this in. We do start secreting insulin the moment we think about eating. So there's not a whole lot we can do about that, right? If we're just sort of like seeing a commercial or seeing something about food. But we can make a change if we are drinking like stevia or artificial sweeteners, like diet sodas or things in our tea all day. Likely that sweet taste is going to make us think about eating. And so it can be really helpful if you drink coffee or tea to just slowly over time adjust to drinking it black or plain, or even just a little bit of non-sweetened creamer in it, because that sweet taste, it can cause insulin secretion. And sometimes it just causes more cravings because it reminds us like, hey, I like that taste. Remember to get to get something else sweet, right? We just kind of think about it more often. So every meal can include 3 to 5 servings of vegetables or fruits. I often will talk about, like, if your plate is here, that we have half a plate of non-starchy vegetables, green, purple, yellow, red, you know, lots of color. That'll give us vitamins and minerals and fiber. We also get carbs from that. That we get a palm-sized portion of protein. That could be a couple eggs or, you know, 2 to 4 ounces of fish, meat, beans, legumes, a palm-sized portion. Some healthy fat. That could be one way to make the vegetables really tasty, is to add some olive oil or coconut oil, avocado oil, butter, grass-fed butter to the vegetables. And then the optional additional carbohydrate. So if you're watching this and you are wondering what you can do if you're pre-diabetic or diabetic, typically either removing this part or keeping this part to a smaller portion is going to be helpful, and eating a little bit extra healthy fat. If you don't have an issue that you know of with insulin resistance, and you know you're pretty active or you exercise, or I would say especially women working on like hormone balance or that are very stressed, then you might want to make sure to include this part and just have a nice balance of protein, complex carbs, and some healthy fat in the meal. There's other ways we adjust that, but that's just some quick thoughts on how much or little carb to have. And then know that we get carbohydrates from fruit. So that could be your optional additional carbohydrate, is to have some fruit. If you're trying to eat a little lower carb, berries are a great option. If you're not, you know, you've got the full range of veggie or fruits that you can choose from. Making sure that as you make changes to pick one thing at a time, not try to do everything at once, because a lot of times that's overwhelming. We get stressed and then we fail. So I always encourage little changes over time that fit each week in what you want to do, making sure to plan ahead and take food with you and prepare ahead of time, because it's usually when we're stuck without anything that we run into trouble. And making sure that there is a sleep doctor in town, and he talks about how one poor night of sleep can cause insulin resistance the next day. So if you have ever not gotten a good night of sleep and then craved sugar the next day, there's a reason for that, hormonally in the body. So sleep is vital, really, really important for blood sugar and to reduce cravings. Aim for 7 to 9 hours per night. There's a lot of things you can do for helping to fall asleep at night. I personally have found that blue light blocking glasses after the sun goes down, if I have to be on my computer or do any work, or even just wearing them around my house, is really helpful to help me wind down before bed. But trying to get off of screens and TV an hour before sleep, doing things to calm down and wind down before bedtime, making sure the room's really dark and there's not something that's going to beep and wake you up, in the room, is helpful. Of course, for blood sugar, exercise is huge. If we are insulin resistant, exercise can actually, there's like a backdoor way it can help get sugar out of the blood and into the cell. So it is huge for people with insulin resistance. I mean, for everybody, but it can really help reduce blood sugar. And insulin is to get daily exercise, whatever's available to you. Even a 7-minute workout. There are apps for a 7-minute workout that I'll just do it here in my office. If you're working at home or you have somewhere that you can just take 7 minutes to do a little exercise, that is better than not doing anything at all. So we can address our foods, get sleep, exercise. And we'll take some questions now. I also will just share that I am, you can find my website right now at wiredandtiredwomen.com. I do work with men too, and I'm in the process of rebranding and updating my website. So it's going to be evolvewellnesskc.com, but you can find it. You'll always be able to find it from wiredandtiredwomen.com. So I have a lot of blog articles on there. I have a lot of info on hormone balance and gut health. So if that would be helpful for you, feel free to check it out. You find me on Facebook or Instagram too. And I always provide for new clients, if you're interested in one-on-one support, I always will jump on a Zoom or a phone call for a complimentary 30 minutes and just chat with you about what's going on if you're curious and want to kind of see how I work. But I do functional medicine and nutrition coaching. So, all right, we'll take some questions. After 60, how do I increase my metabolism? Yeah, so, there's not like a black and white answer to that. There's not like a one answer thing, but definitely as we age, our need for macronutrients and energy changes. And usually we don't handle the amount of carbs that we handled when we were younger as well. I'll see this a lot of times in women. There's a shift sometimes at 30 or 35, but usually 40. A lot of women start to notice things kind of shift at 40. And then definitely after 55 or 60, there's some other changes, and we're going to see changes around menopause also. And so women who are postmenopausal typically do well with reducing carbohydrates a little bit. So when, if you've heard about low carb or keto approaches, those don't work as well for women for premenopausal women unless they have insulin resistance. But postmenopause, that is something that can work a little bit better. And you don't have to go all the way to keto. You can just kind of pull the carbs down somewhat and increase healthy fat a little bit, and making sure, again, that we're not like just over consuming calories. The other thing too is making sure to get, sleep Sometimes sleep gets reduced a little bit, not needing as much sleep. So making sure that still getting sleep, it sounds like you're probably still working, because I think a lot of people here are here because of their employer. I don't know if everyone is, but I also have a lot of women in 60s and 70s who, when they retire, the schedule gets off a little bit and aren't getting kind of the same sleep they got before. So that's something to keep in mind. So kind of the big picture, but I would maybe look at macronutrients and see about reducing carbs a little bit, and maybe playing around in that area.
And there's one more question. How many grams of carbs should we get per day?
How many grams of carbs per day? Yeah, so that's a really good question. And there is not a one size fits all answer for that, because if somebody has insulin resistance, like if somebody's pre-diabetic, I will get labs on people. And like, for example, I had someone recently who came in, she was not pre-diabetic or diabetic, but she was having trouble losing weight. She's about 38. And we got her labs back, and her insulin should be between 2 to 5, ideally. And it was 25. Her glucose was normal though, and her A1C was normal. And this is what we see with when there's insulin resistance, but there's not a diabetes diagnosis yet, which means that we need to pull the carbs back. So for her, I would recommend under 50 grams of carbs per day. So we're actually going to do keto in that situation to reduce that, or to bring the insulin levels down and get the insulin receptors working better. But for somebody else, we could be at around 150 grams of carbs per day, which would be more moderate to high. So if you're looking at your grams of carbs per day, a higher carb is going to be 150 to 250 or more. And that is good for athletes, for high metabolism. Like if somebody's lean and they're trying to gain weight, pregnancy, lactation. If somebody is going for moderate carb, which is what I would just as a general thing, it's a good place to start. Then I would start around 100 to 150 grams of carbs per day and see how you do there. That is a lot lower than the standard American diet, but for the human body, it's just an average approach. Then once we start dropping below 100 or below 75, we're getting into low carb. So hopefully that helps conceptualize that.
And there's the same question, except how many grams of protein should one get per day?
Yeah, protein. Again, you can aim for about 1 gram per kilogram of body weight. So I'm going to put this in the chat box because it's a little confusing, but if you take your weight in pounds and divide by 2.2, that will give you your kilograms. And then that's how many grams of protein I would eat per day as an average. Some people may need a little more. Some people can go with a little less, but as a starting point, that's a good place to start.
And there is another question about palm oil. The person who asks says palm oil is often listed as the unhealthy oils that are put on baked goods.
Yeah.
She's questioning the palm oil.
Yeah. So palm oil is a saturated fat. That is why it got kind of a bad rap. We do need saturated fat. If any of you are here and you have had high cholesterol your whole life, or your cholesterol goes up when you eat saturated fats, then you might want to avoid that one. But for a lot of people, that's not going to affect their cholesterol. There's also an environmental issue with palm oil. It's not very sustainable, but there are sustainably sourced options. So that's another reason sometimes people would have an opinion one way or another on palm oil. But from a nutrition perspective, it is okay, so long as you're not worried. So long as you've always had sort of average cholesterol levels, you are probably fine with that. It's not one though that I use a lot for like cooking. It's not going to be like olive oil and avocado oil are great for light cooking. Higher temperature cooking, you might want to go with coconut, avocado, or palm oil. But palm oil can be a nice option for baking if you do well with it. There was a question here. Do you look at total carbs or net carbs? Good question. I usually look at net carbs because what I've found, especially in my people that are doing low carb, is that when they do total carbs, if they're trying to get them lower, they kind of stop eating vegetables, and vegetables are really important. So net carbs, for those of you that aren't sure what that is, that's the total carbs minus the fiber. So if you look at a label and you see that like the food has 20 grams of carbs and then there's 10 grams of fiber, then the net carbs are 10 because we take 10 grams of fiber away from the total carbs, which gives us the net carbs. And so I would just go off net carbs because it gives you space for more veggies. The only caveat is that there are a lot of processed foods that market things as low carb by putting a bunch of fiber in it. That's okay once in a while, and it will probably be a better option than a higher carb like bar, for example. But I wouldn't go off net carbs if you're eating primarily processed foods. I would use that more for like a at least 80% whole foods diet approach. I saw the question about not being able to sleep more than 6 hours. I have clients like that. And, you know, where we really get in trouble is when we're sleeping under 5 hours a night. Sometimes with that sleep where it's just, you know, oh, I can only ever sleep for 6 hours or 7 hours, or 6.5 hours. It's close to that 7 hours a night. So I'm not as worried, but I would I know you said newly added stress. I would probably look at the bigger picture of the day, making sure that we're giving the body enough like relaxation, especially considering there's a little bit less sleep, and maybe just get curious and explore if there is any way to increase the sleep a little bit. It sounds like you've done that, but yeah, I mean, 6 hours isn't too bad. I have people that come and, you know, they're sleeping for 4 hours a night or 3 hours and then 2, and that's it. So when we're at that point, we definitely need to focus on it. There was a question about carb range in grams for women over 40. I think I answered that one, April, but let me know if I didn't quite cover that or if you have any additional questions. Oh, I should have mentioned this. If you go on my website at wiredandtiredwomen.com, there is a downloadable PDF that has tips to help with energy. And they're just good baseline tips for a healthy approach with food, supplements, or lifestyle to support healthy energy levels day to day. Feel free to go there and download it. If you do that, it will sign you up for my email list. And I have not been great lately about getting new blog articles out because I'm finishing a graduate degree, but I will be done with that in a couple months. And I'm going to be really focused on getting some new things written and some new recipes sent out on a regular basis and things like that. So feel free to sign up if you would like getting those things. Any more questions?
If you have a couple of minutes, maybe it would be beneficial for people to know the difference between omega-3 and omega-6s.
Omega-3 and omega-6, yes. And I just saw a question too. It's in the blog. So the blog is where I have a lot of articles for different things. If you want the downloadable, if you go to just the home page, you'll see a place that says download the free guide. And that's where you can download that free guide. And then it'll just get emailed to your email.
And somebody question about dried fruit.
Yeah, dried fruit. So dried fruit is usually like a simple carbohydrate. It has a decent amount of sugar that gets digested and absorbed pretty quickly. If you're hiking or you're exercising, it can be a really great fast way to get some energy, and it's a lot healthier than, you know, a sugar or a refined sugar. So I would definitely say if you want some fast carb energy, that dried fruit is a good option, but do be aware of that because sometimes people are eating dried fruit like every day when they're kind of sitting all day at work, thinking that it's, you know, a better option than something like, you know, nuts or things like that. So I would just use that in moderation. Kind of use it when you want it. And then the question, you said omega-3 and omega-6s. Omega-3 fats are from things like fish, walnuts, hemp seed, flaxseed. And we use omega-3s to make prostaglandins in the body that slow down or stop inflammation. So it's going to reduce inflammation. And we use omega-6s, which we get from meats, nuts, grains, and also in high amounts from vegetable oils. And that's the big source of it for most people, is that when we eat out, most places cook with canola oil. You know, unless you're at like a farm to table restaurant, they probably use high omega-6 oil. And those are used in the body to make prostaglandins that increase inflammation. And so if we're getting a lot of those vegetable oils, we're going to have higher inflammation and not enough means to reduce that inflammation if our omega-3s are low. So the best thing to do is to kind of adjust the oils you use at home by reducing your vegetable oil and instead using things like olive, avocado, coconut, and increasing omega-3s from walnuts, fish, seafood, hemp seeds or flax seeds, chia seeds, and to help manage that balance, because we really want a 1-to-1 ratio.
There was a question about exercise. How does one balance sitting at work all day?
Yeah, it's tough with sitting a lot during the day. And so counterbalancing with food usually is going to be, you know, when I talked about like the plate having half a plate of veggies, a palm-sized portion of protein, and some healthy fat, that's a good place to start. And then making sure that you're getting some carbohydrates. You know, I don't know more about your health, but probably the carbs are fine, but making sure that it's not too high and just having a nice balance, and then taking a good break so that sometimes it's easy too when we're sitting a lot to like snack regularly. So focusing on having like 3 or 4 hours where we're just not eating, and maybe we just drink like a plain tea or a plain coffee if that's in your something that you enjoy. Drinking a lot of water. That's what I would say with food to start, is, you know, making sure that we're getting whole foods and not eating too much and getting a good balance.
All right, I think it's 12:45, and you said this would be your cutoff time. And there's a question about fast, but maybe it would be a next program, or maybe we already had a program on fast. So reach out to me to see if it is coming. I should thank you, Brooke, for being able and available for these amazing wellness programs. Also wanted to thank you, G and Certain, for our partnership in wellness. If you have any questions, email me directly at mborn@kckpl.org or call me at the library. My name is Magda, and I'm the Community Resources Librarian at the main branch. So thank you so much for being so interested in wellness. It's kind of the most important thing in our life. And thank you, Brooke, again, and hope to see you again soon.